How you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Michael. And I want to thank everybody for inviting me to speak. If someone could pull up my PowerPoint presentation. You're going to see a PowerPoint presentation that's the same as what I presented to the Planning Commission a few weeks ago. I know at least a couple of you were there at that time. Candidly, I felt like some of the Planning Commission members were preoccupied with what I was not aware of was the election coming up at that same meeting for a new commission chair. And I would beg for your attention as I go through this program because I really feel it is important. I applied to be on the advisory committee for the comprehensive plan. I wasn't accepted, but I've been attending the meetings anyway, just as a member of the public. And it struck me that a lot of people had opinions on the comprehensive plan should go this direction or it should go this direction. But there's a real lack of data. No one had really done an analysis on what the consequences would be if we chose to do this or if we chose to do that. So I got thinking about it and thought about what is the information that we need. And what I'm bringing you tonight is information that will allow you to make what you think is the best decision for Franklin County. How do I advance this?
Just tell Andrew. He's like your little guy in the sky.
Okay. So the comprehensive plan is to be driven by an advisory committee, and that is something that I don't feel has been happening exactly the way it was intended. There was 25 people appointed to the advisory committee, but the process started out by going through details on wording of what does this zoning requirement mean, and should we put a dash or a semicolon here and there. And I think a lot of people just became disinterested and dropped out. And what we've had left as part of the advisory committee for, I don't know, at least the last 9 months hasn't been a quorum. It's been a handful of people who have been driving this towards their agenda, and I don't think it represents this outcome that we would have had if all 25 people had the wherewithal to stick with it. But you guys, I think, then will get to see the comp plan as proposed by the quote-unquote advisory committee, and you can decide whether you think it's in the best interest. And I hope this information today will help. The thing I want to remind you of is this comp plan. If you look at those 2 bullets at the bottom, which are in bold, comp plan is the single best opportunity we will have for the next decade to promote industrial growth. It's also the single best opportunity that we will have to stifle industrial growth. And you guys will decide where to strike the balance. Next slide, please. Where I started this analysis was I made a list of projects that need work in this city and this county. And you are familiar with a lot of these. You've struggled, you've wrestled with a lot of these. A new county park on the Elkhorn is something that I know people have talked about, a new swimming facility, renewable energy, riverbank stabilization, removal of invasive plants, the sports tournament facilities in the county. You can look through the list. You can decide which ones you think are most important. In fact, I would encourage you as a body to do that. Review each of these and make a priority list. But the amount of money that's going to be required to accomplish these things is huge. It's absolutely huge. And the city or the county just do not have that kind of money. And I really think we desperately need more revenue to come into the city and the county coffers. Next slide, please. I am proposing that one way to do this is to bring in manufacturing jobs. Why manufacturing jobs? Well, because they pay well. If we grow the city and the county with tourism, which I'm all in favor of, You must keep in mind that a lot of those jobs that will be created are down there in the line that says accommodation and food service. That's the people who work in the hotels and work in the restaurants. And you look at what their average annual salary was in Franklin County in 2021, and it's about a third of what a manufacturing job is. Manufacturing not only brings in good paychecks, those paychecks result in disposable income, which they then can spend also in the restaurants and in support services, induced jobs such as doctors, dentists, teachers, accountants, attorneys, etc. So the well-paying manufacturing jobs will create additional induced jobs. Next slide, please. Typically, this is information that I got from Kimberly, which she got from the state. In Franklin County, 1,000 additional manufacturing jobs would create about an additional 500 induced jobs. Manufacturing jobs at this point are paying about $52,000. The induced jobs would pay about $52,000 if you average out those higher income jobs with the lower income jobs. Next slide, please. I think some people are concerned. They have fears of what industrial development looks like. They think it's going to be an eyesore. They think it's going to be a pollution source. This is industrial park number 3. I went out and took these pictures. You'll see that there's a lot of green space. There's also roads and there's concrete. As far as pollution, they'll be hooked up to our sewer system. It'll go into the sewer system, the same as everything else in the city and county. And if you compare that to the next slide, please. If you compare what we just saw was industrial development and compare it to commercial development, this is the shopping area over on the west side of town where Walgreens is, where the Hampton Inn is, where Aldi's is, and the slide in the upper left is the parking lot for customers. The area in the upper right, that's the area where the trucks unload and deliver in the back. The one on the bottom is looking over towards Frisch's and the Hampton Inn, and I would ask you in your own minds to compare which is more of an eyesore, the commercial development or the industrial development. I think it's kind of a toss-up. Next slide, please. Can we actually grow manufacturing jobs in Franklin County? And this would indicate that we certainly can. The Kentucky Center for Statistics shows that in 2022, we grew manufacturing jobs at 3.8%. Durable manufacturing grew at 4.2%. A lot of these jobs are coming in across the nation from reshoring of businesses where corporations move their manufacturing facilities overseas, and they're now seeing that they did too much of that and need to bring some of them back. There's also foreign direct investment, foreign companies investing here in the United States, as we've seen, and that job growth is even more robust. So keep those percentages in mind, 3.8, 4.2 percent growth in industrial jobs is what Kentucky has been seeing. Next slide, please. If you look at the growth in population over the past 20 years, Franklin County has been growing at an annual rate of 0.4%. Compare that to Shelby, Scott, Woodford, and Anderson. Those 4 counties have been growing at a rate of 1.8%. They've been growing 4 times faster than Franklin County. And why is that? Well, the last comprehensive plan was completed, you guys may know better than I think it was like 14 years ago. And we quickly ran out of industrial land. So if you had somebody who wanted to come in and establish a business here in Franklin County, there was no land set aside for industrial development. It had all been used up. And so I think some of the large opportunities just looked elsewhere. Some of the small opportunities have tried to fit. We've even had companies that were located here that decided it was time to expand, and there was no place to expand, and they moved to a neighboring county. So bringing in new businesses, creating opportunities for existing business to expand, we need to do better than what we've done in the past. And I think one could make a good argument that we should be growing something closer to the 1.8, or if you throw out Scott County, because a lot of that growth was driven by Toyota, and you just look at Shelby and Anderson, if we could, just grow at the rate they're growing, it would still be about 1.5%. Next slide, please. This is the slide that is really the meat and potatoes of this presentation, of this analysis. What I've done for you here is to show you if you grow the population at an annual rate of 0.2, 0.4, 1%, 1.4, or 1.8%, what does that do to the population over the next 30 years? And what I've done in this analysis is I have focused on 30 years worth of growth. If you just set aside enough land for 10 years of industrial growth, you run a very real risk that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we will not have any land that's suitable for industrial growth. Industrial businesses need land that is relatively flat and that has access to the utilities. And Franklin County does not have a lot of relatively flat land. We've got a lot of relatively hilly land. And so I would suggest that we set aside land for industrial development that will last us for the next 30 years. And so over 30 years, if you grow the population at those rates, you can see what the population increase will be over 30 years. And then what will that population consist of? 42% of it, if we assume that if we're trying to grow this with industrial growth, then 42% of those jobs would be manufacturing jobs. Another 21% would be jobs that were induced by those manufacturing jobs. 34% would be young people and retirees who are not part of the workforce. And 4%, I threw that in there trying to allow space in this analysis for remote workers, people who we're trying to attract with the grant that Kimberly has just mentioned a few minutes ago, where they could live here, but their employer and their work might be someplace, a law firm in some other state, an accounting firm in some other state. All right. So stick with that slide, thank you. If you're going to create those manufacturing jobs, 1,300, 2,700, 7,500, 15,000, you're going to have to create jobs for, if the people are going to increase at that rate, you're going to have to create more jobs than that, because a lot of our workers come in from out of the county. About half of the people that are working in jobs here come in from outside of the county. So you would you need twice as many jobs as you would as you would have for people. And if you assume that those jobs would be put to work at about 8 jobs per acre, and if you also assume that you're going to need to set aside more land than you really need, because how do I explain this? Okay, if you set aside 1,000 acres for industrial growth, you're probably not going to be able to use all 1,000 acres. Some of those landowners are not going to want to sell their land. Some of that land may have issues with the structure of the land that it's not developable upon. So I assume that you need 20% more land than you're actually going to put into work. And that's how you arrive at those bold numbers down at the bottom of 400 acres, 800 acres, 2,300 acres, 3,500 acres, or 4,700 acres. Now, why did they create a column for 0.2%? That's because there are some people on the advisory committee who feel like the population of Franklin County is going to grow by 3,000 people over the next 27 years. And this is based on a number that they got from the Kentucky Data Center, and they think that it's some sort of a magic number, and that there's nothing we can do to make that number larger than an additional 3,000 people. I don't agree with that outlook at all. It's saying that it is beyond our control. Whatever policies we adopt, good, bad, or otherwise, we can drive that number negative if we wanted to, okay? We can make that number bigger if we want to. And you decide what point you want to see this county grow. Those acres down there at the bottom, what do they represent as far as the percentage of total acres of Franklin County? 0.2%, 0.5%, 1.4%, 2.1%, 2.8%. We're not talking about, well, okay, it depends on your viewpoint. As a percentage goes, that's not that much of our county. As far as acres goes, it's all, I'll leave that in your judgment as to whether that's a lot of acres or whether it's not a lot of acres. Next slide, please. But the result of this, if we go to the next slide, please. The other thing is if however much industrial land we set aside, we can help shape what that industrial land is going to look like. And this is a list of ideas that I came up with that I think we can impose upon whoever develops this industrial land. Leave the existing trees wherever possible. Require landscaping with native trees and shrubs. Forbid the use of invasive plant species. Create visual barriers. Make sure the lighting is night sky friendly. Put in permeable surfaces on parking areas where you don't have large trucks driving over it. Design the buildings so that if you don't put in solar panels today, you can put solar panels in tomorrow. The buildings that are designed to carry that weight load. Retention and detention ponds should be approved by DNR and Fish and Wildlife. We can do things with this industrial land going forward that will make it more environmentally friendly as possible for industrial land. Next slide, please. All right, now, what kind of taxes are we going to generate from this industrial land? And again, I've shown you the same 5 columns. And if you grow the population at a steady rate over those 30 years, this shows you the cumulative incremental wages in millions. So if you look at the middle column, you'd be growing incremental wages at about $9.7 billion. And you'd be growing occupational taxes at about $115 million in that center column. That's assuming a 1.19% tax rate. 80% of the jobs would be in the county, taxed at 1%. 20% of the jobs would be in the city, taxed at 1.95%. So there's the occupational taxes that you would create by each of those different 5 growth rates. Next slide, please. I then tried to figure out what we would see in the way of property tax increases. And first of all, if you're going to convert ag land to industrial land, right now ag land pays about $12 an acre. What I did is I went into the PVA, I looked up a bunch of different properties and looked at what tax rate they're paying. Ag land pays about $12 an acre per year. And you compared that to industrial parks 2 and 3, and I compared it to the new a bunch of the bourbon warehouses, including the new ones up on the bluff. And you can see that you generate about $5,000 an acre more per year if you convert ag land to industrial land. Not saying we should do that, I'm just showing you what the result is in the way of property taxes. I also recommend that we take some of this revenue that would be generated from this new industrial development and we invest it. And I'm suggesting that we invest it in infill development. This would fall mostly on the city's shoulders. We've got places where we keep building more shopping areas historically, and looks like we're continuing to do it in the future. And at the same time, existing shopping centers are closing their doors and turning out their lights, okay? Why is that? Well, if you don't have any job growth and you don't have any money for people to spend in our stores, then you're not going to be able to support more stores, okay? Yet we keep building more stores. I think if you create jobs, now you have people that will live here, shop here, support these stores, and we won't have to expand in urban sprawl and move farther out into the county. We can take infill properties, like 2 infill properties that come to mind are the Century Plaza area over on 127 and the Eastwood Shopping Center over on Versailles Road. That's the rate that they're being taxed at today. Compare that to existing businesses that seem to be doing well, and you get that area over there by Aldi's, that's being taxed at about $13,600 an acre. The Franklin Square area, which is the Kroger on the west side, that's being taxed at about $9,000. And the Sir Riverford Apartments, that's the official name on those apartments over there behind Dick's Sporting Goods. That's taxed at about $11,000. So if we were able to do an infill development, and it's going to take some upfront money to make that land ready for a developer to work on, you'd be generating about another $8,500 per year in property taxes. Next slide, please. So here's the incremental occupational taxes that I've shown up on the top part. There's the cumulative, I'm sorry, that title is wrong. This is the incremental property taxes. And the cumulative property taxes down there on the bottom come out to $26 million on the low end, $320 million on the high end. If you go to the next slide, where you add the occupational tax and the property tax together over a 30-year time period, that's the kind of incremental taxes that you'd be generating for the city and the county. Next slide, please. So if you go back and you look at where we started, all the projects that are not being funded because we do not have the funds, this is a way to grow those funds at whatever of those rates you think is in the best interest. But I want to remind you that jobs create a quality of life here in our community. They're what puts food on the table, what buys houses, what buys transportation, what puts clothes on the family's back. It improves the quality of life for the people. It also improves the quality of life by increasing the tax revenue, which we can then spend on projects to make life better here. And the one thing that I think oftentimes gets lost in this discussion is if you think of the kids who are graduating from the Franklin County, Frankfort City schools, last year we graduated 441 kids, okay? How many of those found jobs in Frankfort and Franklin County? I don't think too many. Local jobs give our kids a reason to stay. If they go off to college, it gives them a reason to come back. You've created some well-paying jobs here, both in the industrial sector and in the induced jobs that industrial sector creates. Next slide, please. The long list of needs for the community are currently going unmet. I would ask you, what is your vision for Franklin County? I don't think you have to accept whatever the advisory committee hands you. You need to think for yourselves. You need to think for your constituents. And the growth rate that we strive for is the growth rate that we will achieve. Last slide, please. One more, please.
Andrew, one more slide.
That's it.
Is that it?
all.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you
It
good
is?
with any questions, Rich? You want to take a couple questions?
Absolutely.
Anybody have any questions?
There was supposed to be one more slide, and I must have accidentally deleted from the presentation. And what that slide said basically was, please think in terms of 30 years of growth here and setting aside land for 30 years. And if we set aside a couple of thousand acres, you don't have to throw it all open at one time. You can do that in increments. You can set aside 400 acres, and you control the growth by not allowing them access to sewer if they move beyond that 400 acres initially. Wait till that 400 acres gets pretty well occupied. Then open up the next chunk and the next chunk over time. That way, if we have overestimated how much land we need, we haven't despoiled the entire land that's been set aside. We can control that growth. In 10 years from now, we'll have an opportunity when we're working on the next comprehensive plan to reevaluate and say, oh wow, we were too optimistic or we were too pessimistic. But if you're not optimistic now, you're not going to have an opportunity to be optimistic in the future because that land will be converted to residential or commercial property.
Squire Tracy.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Just a couple questions. Obviously, everybody wants to compare us to Shelby County, and I'm in Shelby County 3 or 4 days a week, and in Simpsonville, so I get to see all the industrial projects that they're doing, and especially the Simpsonville area. It's really nice. But knowing that Franklin County is only 212 square miles, and a lot of that's Kentucky River and Elkhorn Creek, is it really fair to compare us to Shelby County, them being 386 square miles?
Squire, you guys go by Squire, so Squire Tracy. You're going to have to be the judge of that.
Okay.
I can't advise you on that. I think one thing you should think about is if you look at the amount of industrial land we have available in this county, if we don't act now to set that land aside, then our industrial growth is going to dwindle down to nothing, okay? I'm not suggesting that we grow at the same rate as Shelby County. What was Shelby County at on that list? 1.2%? 1 point?
I think it's 8.5.
Okay. No, it's higher than 1.85? Yeah, 1.85
is the number.
Shelby County is growing 4 times as fast as we are. They have been growing 4 times as fast as we are over the past 20 years. I'm not suggesting we have to grow at 1.8. We might want to grow at 1.4, 1%, okay, something. But my opinion, we need to shift up into the next gear and get going a little bit faster than the 0.4.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I'm just asking because it would lead to my next question. When you think of the industrial park, or at least when I think of the industrial park, it's almost like it's a buffet. You've got everything in our industrial park. Mm-hmm. To where you look at surrounding counties, their industrial parks, you don't see that.
Okay, this is an important question. Actually, when I presented to the Planning Commission, this is a question I think that Brett Swager asked. Are we going to try to target large employers that take up a large footprint with a large number of jobs, or are we going to target smaller employers with smaller footprints, smaller number of jobs, but more of them? Well, with our existing industrial parks, we've been basically doing fairly small parcels at a time. And if you look at some of those facilities that I've seen from the freeway over in Shelby County, they look to be pretty darn big. That's a discussion that I didn't get into here. You can do it one way or you can do it the other way. I think there are actually some advantages to having many smaller employers. That way, if one particular industry or business falls out of favor, people don't buy candles anymore. They don't do that. They don't buy gas-powered vehicles anymore. They buy electric vehicles, whatever. If you've got a diversity in your industrial park, I think you've got a little bit of a built-in insurance policy.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I know it's a lot of information. I know this is not the first time or last time we're going to talk about this. Squire Wisman.
No questions, just a couple of comments. One of them, thank you for coming. It was very interesting and eye-opening where we stand. It seems like we're standing in a place that we want to move forward. To me, he's moved to the right from the chart. And I agree, my economy classes I had said people can't make hamburgers and sell them to somebody else making hamburgers and you're gonna get anywhere. You gotta have somebody making widgets somewhere.
Yep.
And, I also agree that your philosophy about smaller footprinted industries is not bad. One of my other lives, I've got 9 or 10, but anyway, I sold feed to farmers.
So did my dad. In fact, I've
I
unloaded
wanted
many
to
semis
sell, I
of
wouldn't
Swift
go
feed.
to a big farmer. I wanted 100 little ones, because if the big one quits you, you're up the creek.
Yep.
And you're not necessarily that way if you got the smaller ones, and so that was a philosophy deal, nothing else. But thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Squire Witzman.
Yeah, thanks, Judge. Thank you for coming and talking to us, and we've talked a number of times about, many things, and, my opinion of Franklin County, and I've said this in so many meetings, is we have to do a fairly critical analysis of what we have that is true and authentic to us to develop, right? We don't have the land holdings that Shelby County has. In fact, we have a topography that's challenging, period, anywhere we try to put a shovel in the ground. I'm weary of places like Scott County that have sort of a monoculture that if they ever decide to leave, what happens to that community? But I think we have a great opportunity. There is a generational shift occurring right now nationwide, right? That the millennial age and on are picking where they live based on many factors that are about quality of life.
Even some of
Job
us geezers
accessibility.
picked where we
I
wanted to
know
live.
you all picked here purposefully because of some of those amenities that are tangible and intangible. That I think we have an opportunity, and I'm hopeful that maybe KCDC will be involved in that now in the future, instead of driving one ideology, that we're going to look what's unique to us, what our land holdings are, what we can support, and then look nationally, who we're competing with, not just at the other counties that everyone's drooling over what's happening in Shelby County, but where we can pigeonhole ourselves in as something unique that no one else is doing, that we can be a great attraction. I think we have a great opportunity to do that. I don't think that is going to be large-scale industrial development with single or one or two, manufacturers, but I do think it's going to be things related to the bourbon industry, the tourism industry, things that are unique to Kentucky's capital, the landscape that we have here that we don't use whatsoever to the level that it could be.
Well, if you look at our major employers, Eric, some of those feed the automotive industry in a smaller way. And I think I would hope that we will actually have an opportunity to do some picking and choosing. We are in a really sweet spot. Kentucky's in a sweet spot. When I moved here, I grew up in Minnesota. I lived in Austin, Texas for 25 years. When my wife and I decided to move here, we like the fact that Kentucky is so centrally located. And businesses look at it the same way. Okay? You're close to the majority of the population in the United States, and Franklin County is on a major east-west freeway. Two major north-south freeways are just on either side of us. I think a lot of manufacturers are looking to Kentucky as a place to move to or to build. And I think we will be able to be a little bit
And we're
picky
within
and
one-day delivery to most of the U.S.
Yep.
now, right? So sort of my challenge is, we've talked about this in some ways, but I really want to see one of our agencies, or all of our agencies, do a critical analysis. I've asked, actually back when we were doing the housing study, I brought a gentleman in that did the housing study to talk with our judge and our mayor about doing a feasibility study of types of employment based on our population, our age, our socioeconomic status of our residents, and those within, a reasonable driving distance to here, replacing state government jobs that aren't seemingly coming back. What do we have that we can actually support? And I have a personal feeling that a lot of that is the small startup industrial type businesses that are manufacturing goods and products that are tailored to this region. That can be sold nationally. We have some examples of that in the woolery that's here, Canterbury Candles, and some of those homegrown business types that are that we're not competing nationally to get them. We can foster them here. So I would really like to, I appreciate the information you've provided, and I hope we can take a next step, actually doing some of that critical analysis on what is unique locally and where we can compete nationally. And I don't think we've done that yet. So I think that's a critical next step.
I agree.
Squire Sebastian.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate you being with us. 3 years ago, I wrote something very similar, was serialized in the State Journal, and it's kind of, I'm appreciating you picking this up, because it sort of fell on closed ears maybe at the time. Maybe it was kind of ahead of its time at that point, where it discussed pockets of things that we could do, capitalizing on nursing at Kentucky State University, because there's such a shortage across the world of nurses, not only in the country, not only in our community. It talked about capitalizing on tourism for economic development purposes. It talked about looking to the 100-plus universities that are within 100 miles of us, who have brain talent and love the outdoor life that the Elkhorn Creek and other things, we have here, so that they are not commuting. My friends' children are commuting in
I'm smiling not because I think what you're saying is funny. I'm smiling because it sounds like it's coming out of my own mouth. I think this exactly the same.
You probably read what I wrote 3 years ago.
I think exactly the same way.
Very
Sherry.
similar.
In fact, sometime, another day, I'd like to talk to you about that nursing portion.
It was an important thing to me then. It's an important thing to me continuing on today, or I wouldn't have sat down and put some effort to that. But it is and I had connected with Kentucky State at the time. Since then, 2 presidents have come and gone, so that is kind of scaled back, but it sounds like they're ramping up some things with nursing. So to me, this is very on point. It was on point for me at the time, and why we are not pulling in cutting-edge manufacturing and or grown things, or capitalizing on the resources here, to the point I think that Squire Tracy made. We are 97th in landmass size out of 120 counties, and our topography is a tremendous challenge. We're bifurcated by a river. We have undulating and, rolling hills here, very rocky terrain. So there is, similar to our cousin counties in eastern Kentucky, lots of challenges with our land. So we have to do this in a very thoughtful, purposed way, rather than maybe the first person knocking at the door being the opportunity that we want to capitalize on. So I'll leave it at that.
I did a different analysis. In fact, I started with a different analysis. I looked at all of the corporations who had come to KCDC over the past 2 years and asked if we had land, if we had this many acres of land, it would create this many jobs. Okay, and I made some assumptions, like we would maybe only be able to get one out of 10 of those would be actually we'd be able to bring it home if we had land available. But none of them came here because we didn't have any land available, and that would indicate that we could grow the business even more if we had the land set aside. I want to go back. Somebody mentioned the housing study. Eric mentioned the housing study. I was on that committee and helped select Points Consulting to do that housing study, and I thought they did a good job. But one of the things that we suffered from on that housing study was the same thing, that they looked at how our population has grown over the past 20 years, and therefore they projected pretty small population growth going forward. Whatever they assumed or whatever they projected, housing and jobs go hand in hand. And if we're going to create jobs, we need places for those people to live. And if we're going to create housing, we need jobs to fill that housing. And so that's part of the equation also that we need to look at.
Rich, we thank you.
I thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. Alrighty. Tammy, I believe you're up.